today. Some things, and actually I should preface this with a couple of documents that I'm going to be referring to. Okay, this one is the collective bargaining agreement between the Board of Trustees of the California State University and the California Faculty Association. You are all members of what we call Unit 3. It's one of the bargaining units on campus. There's a Unit 11, which is academic student employees. All the other units, I know the numbers because I can count, but I don't know the names of which one's associated with which. Our office deals with Unit 3, that's you. Unit 11, which is student employees. I've been told this is one of the fattest CBAs, collective bargaining agreements, some lawyers have ever seen. There's a lot of detail in here. Our office refers to it on a daily basis. You should at least be familiar that this is the controlling document. Campus documents that I'll talk about in just a minute get trumped by this. If there's any disagreement, this one wins. If a state or federal law is in conflict, that wins over this. So even though we talk about this, what we call Section 600, you may have heard of it, this is a campus document. There's a committee on campus, it's the University Level Personnel Committee, it's called PP&R, it's a Personnel Planning and Review Committee. Judy's on it. Anybody else have the pleasure? That's where I got my entree in faculty affairs. I chaired it for 2.5 years, and they said, anybody stupid enough to do this for 2.5 years, we want them over here. So it's a great committee, right, Judy?
It's a great committee.
So no matter what you may hear about PP&R, it's a great committee. You may want to serve on it someday.
Lacking in food, but it's a great committee.
What's that?
Lacking in food.
Yes, lacking food compared to Senate Exec.
Exactly.
Senate Executive Committee is the one that gets all the food. They have this system down where everybody gets fed really well at every meeting. I've not been on that committee yet, but so I've been told. So this is the CBA. I won't refer to it much, if at all, today. Where I'm going to focus my attention is on this. It's called Section 600 of the Administrative Manual. There is a Section 700 that applies to temporary lecturer faculty, but this one is for tenure track. And just for common terminology today, I'm going to give you my version. I call tenure track everyone who is either pre-tenure or tenure. I call that whole thing the tenure track. And I subdivide that into probationary faculty, which you are, and then once you get tenure, then you're tenured faculty. So for me, tenure track is probationary plus tenured. Other people have other definitions I've learned, but that's going to be my working definition for today. So all of you are, at least in the front rows here, are probationary faculty. And you're in given years. Most of you are in year 1. I have a year 2. Now, did any of you who are year 1 come in with service credit? Okay, 1 year or 2? 2 years. Okay? Christine will not be evaluated next year as a second-year faculty, even though it's her second year on campus. She will be evaluated next year as a fourth-year faculty.
I have 1 year service credit.
Okay, so you are physically on campus. Is this your first year here?
Yes.
With 1 year of service credit?
Yes.
Okay, now you can't be evaluated in your first physical year here. So your first evaluation, everybody else can tune me out, except for Christine, you will be evaluated in your in your second year on campus, but as a third-year faculty. So you won't submit in October, you'll submit when all the 3 through 6 year people do. If you have any questions, call us. That gets confusing.
I started last January,
Yeah.
and I have 1 year.
No. For the years to count, it has to be complete academic years. So if you started in the spring, that whole spring semester doesn't count. You start your first year on RTP in the fall. Okay. If you hear to the contrary, call me.
But I have 1 year of service credit before next year.
And you came in January?
Yeah.
Call me, we'll talk about it. We're getting too far down the line, you're going to lose some people that I may have still on the hook. Okay, so you understand your situation? Do you understand yours? So we can talk. So this is Section 600. This is governed by, this comes out of faculty governance. This is not an administrative manual, even though it says administrative manual. This is governed by the faculty. Any changes to this must go through the faculty senate and be approved at that level. We used to distribute hard copies of this to everybody on campus. Somebody decided we're killing too many trees, so this is now, there are a few hard copies available for those of us that use it on a daily basis. For everyone else, it's an electronic copy. You're all comfortable with e-everything, so much more so than I am, so it's available. If you go to the Faculty Affairs website here, go down here to policies, it will show up there. It is searchable, which is a good thing. So here's the section 600, section 700, probably won't have much reference to that until you're tenured and you're serving on personnel committees, then that may kick in. This is the Unit 3 collective bargaining agreement. This just links to the CSU website where it is, and the Unit 11, but even though you won't deal with Unit 11, they just ratified a new CBA that's still not up on the CSU website. When are we going to get to see what the new contract is? Because we have to administer it in our office. But again, it doesn't affect you. And I've been asking Nancy, and Judy, maybe some of you know, we have section 600, section 700. Is there a section 100, 200, 300, 400? I've always wondered, and nobody's ever had an answer.
I've never heard any reference to anything but 600.
600, 700. I haven't either, and I asked somebody,
Never.
everybody goes, I don't know, great question. I don't know either. So if you ask and find the answer, send me an email with the answer to us. Okay, relative to the PIF, a few things, and I'm not going to be able to cover everything about the PIF. It is your property until it goes into the personnel cycle. You put it together. You theoretically can put it together any way you want. What I'm going to suggest is some ways that you might want to follow so that it goes relatively smoothly through the process. You're evaluated on 5 things, and these are specified in section 600. On your professional preparation is number 1. If you were hired here, you've got, that qualifies that one. Every year they'll say you earned a PhD or an EDD or a MFA, whatever the terminal degree is, in such and such, from such and such a university. Well, duh, yeah, we know that when you hired. But every single time you review, they will say you are professionally prepared. Now, some departments may have some accreditation requirements above and beyond just the degree, and those will be stated in there also. That should have been in your position announcement when you were hired. They can't spring it on you. They can't hire you as an MFA, come 3 years later and say, oh, by the way, where's your PhD? Too late, you've been hired. The next 3 are the meat and potatoes of your PIF. And in fact, I'm going to jump down to number 5, so I don't forget to say it. That one is called professional responsibilities. You really don't put anything, much of anything in your PIF about professional responsibilities, because those are things such as meeting your classes, holding your office hours, turning in your grades, all those things that all of us do, of course. Except in our office, every once in a while you hear about cases when they're not done, but that's much the exception. And that 5th section in section 600 makes reference to section 604 in what is called, even though it's not much anymore, the Blue Book. If you talk to somebody here from 20 years ago, they'll say the Blue Book, the Blue Book, the Blue Book. Section 600 is what they're talking about. It's not the other Blue Book. Blue Book is synonymous with section 600. So if you go, and I'm not going to take time to go through it now, section 604, basically it's being a good university citizen. What is expected of faculty members in relation to their colleagues, to the university, and to the students. So what are the big 3 here? One is teaching effectiveness, and anytime I say teaching effectiveness, those of you in counseling or library, substitute counselor or librarian in there, because all of those are covered by the contract as well. It's teaching effectiveness and direct instructional contributions. Most people here are hired because they are good teachers, and the heaviest workload is in teaching, with some scholarly expectations as well. This is not a UC or a Stanford or a Harvard where you teach 1 class a year and get a whole bunch of grants. Primary mission here is to teach. How are you measured on your teaching effectiveness? There are any number of ways. The 2 most basic measures are student evaluations and what we call peer class visits. You've now completed one semester here, some of you more than that. You've gone through one set of student evaluations, one set of peer class visits. I'm going to highlight as I go along a couple of recent changes in the CBA and in Section 600. One of the changes in Section 600 deals with peer class visits. There were occasions when someone would have a peer class visit and the person who visited their class just didn't get around to writing up that report. Weeks went by, months went by, semester goes by, where is my report? This caused some problems and some angst for the faculty member going, did I do a good job? I don't know. PP&R initiated and was approved through Faculty Senate that now it's required that the person who is being visited, the instructor, receive the written report within 14 days of the visit. Puts pressure on the reviewers, but if they're going to do it eventually, they may as well do it in 14 days instead of 54 days, because they're going to have to do it eventually anyway. So if you're visited and you have not received a copy by 14 days, start asking. Say, where is it? Because you have a Blue Book right to have that within 14 days. You also have the right, when you receive that report, to respond to it in writing and to have a meeting with the evaluator to discuss it. Sometimes they may have misunderstood something you did or said, and they may be willing to revise their report. But you always have a right to put a written response to anything that's put into your PAF, that official file. As an aside, so I don't forget it later, all of your student evaluations and all of your peer class visit reports are to be in your PAF. It's the department's and the college's responsibility to make sure that they get them. So you do not have to put them also in your PIF. You may hear guidance from people in your department, others at the college level saying, oh no, you got to put them in your PIF. It's not required. Now, I wouldn't get in a knockdown battle with the department chair who's going to be evaluating you over this issue and say, okay, if you really want them in there, I can put them in there, but they don't have to be in there. Yes? You can call me Bill. Yep.
So if all of that is already in your path, what then regarding this subject you've been doing today?
We'll get to that.
Okay.
There are things such as copies of your syllabi. Even before you start going to the various sections, I'll talk in a minute about what I recommend you put at the front end. And again, it's your file. You decide. I can't tell you to put something in there. I'm just, based on my experience of 20 years or having done any number of PIFs, read any number of PIFs, I think there's some general guidelines that are useful to follow. Because one thing you want to do is make it easy for people to read. You also want to not allow someone the opportunity to tell your story. What I mean by that is, I had a case on my own file where I was in a position where I didn't have any research responsibilities, and this was before I came to Northridge. So I had research and publications when I was over at UCLA, and then all of a sudden there was a 3-year gap in my publications, and then when I started at Northridge, I started to pick up with a couple of publications again. Well, I had this 3-year gap, and it was very evident on my resume that there was nothing for 3 years. So rather than just let that slide and let them tell my story for me, oh, he was at the beach the whole time. I said, no. I was in a position at UCLA where I had no research responsibilities. I was teaching only. I didn't have access to a lab. I couldn't get anything done even if I wanted to. Once I told that story, then it makes sense. I filled in the blank and told my story rather than allowing somebody else to fill in the blanks, perhaps to my disadvantage.
With that, do we then write a narrative for each 5 sections, or just in the beginning?
Oftentimes I'll answer, it depends, and what I mean by that is each department may have its own policies and procedures. In fact, they do in writing. They may have their own culture within the department, and I would listen to the people at the department level, first of all. The provost, Harry, who those of you who've been on personnel committees have seen his roadshow, and he recommends having at the front a narrative. He says 2 pages. I would say 3 to 4 pages because I'm not sure I can get everything into 2 pages myself. But a short, relatively short narrative at the front to tell your story. And each year you update that with, this is what I've done, this is where I'm headed next. So as you read them, as the reviewers read them from year to year, they follow your story as you go along. Realize that your file is going to be read by people outside of your department. Yes?
So when you say that people from outside of the department are being reviewed in foster care, are they following our policy and procedures? Are they following, I mean, I know section 600 is the
Default.
default. So how does that, you know,
Yeah. Until your procedures are approved, because the department has to approve them, the college has to approve them, and PP&R has to approve them. So you don't have any official policies in place. So you're being governed by section 600, which is suitably vague on a lot of things.
Right, but we're thinking, hoping that by the time we all go through this
Yep.
process, those policies will be. So my question is what is that group, that body of people who are reviewing us? What comes first to them? Because I would think that they might suggest that our policy wasn't adequate, and they default back to 600.
No.
Okay.
Okay. The provost has said this many times too. When in doubt, he goes back to the department procedures. And you can find your department's procedures if you go down here a little bit on the screen. There's my little arrow. Touchscreen? Two fingers? Oh, there you go. See, I learned something. I told you I'm not real techie. Okay, your college procedures, not all colleges have procedures. About half do. HHD does, I know, because that's my home college. Other ones do. Some colleges do not. This is optional. All departments must have department procedures. If they don't, they're on section 600.
Does college trump department?
No. It may add some requirements. So in the business school, for example, was there somebody from finance? Yeah. They have elaborate college procedures, but that's accreditation based. In terms of being, I'm learning these things, AQ and PQ and all these things, academically qualified, and is it professionally qualified? Yeah, I've learned these things in the last 3 years. So business, for example, has very relatively stringent college procedures. Most other college procedures are more suggestions, general guidelines kinds of things. But it really comes home to the department procedures. That's the starting point. And if there's a dispute or an appeal and it moves up and the provost eventually is making a decision on a file that may have some controversy or some disagreement, he'll go back to the department procedures and say, did they follow the procedures? That's what he'll go by. Now, how are these procedures developed? And it will address your question, I think. Okay, let's say that your department has no procedures and you're developing them. You're still on section 600. Once they're approved, they go into effect that next fall. But evaluation criteria within those procedures don't go into effect for 3 years. Unless the candidate chooses to go by the new criteria. So even if they're approved for next fall, they can't say, oh, you owe me 3 publications, because that's in the procedures. Now, after 3 years, then they kick in and you'd be in year 4 or 5, and then you're held to them, so you got to anticipate that in between. Now, let's say you have a department who has procedures already in place. Those procedures come up for review at the department, college, and PP&R level once every 5 years, or sooner if the department wants to. So departments are on a rotating 5-year cycle. We get about, 10 to 12 each year on schedule.
At least
100,
100.
yeah. Seems like 100 when you're on the committee. But. So we get 10, 12, maybe 15 of these coming up every year for review. Departments get to look at them and say, we want to update things, which they can do. At PP&R, largely, are they still in compliance after 5 years with the collective bargaining agreement, because they may have a new one? Are they compliant with Section 600, which may have undergone some revisions? So those get approved. When those are approved, they go into effect the next fall. And when I say go into effect, it means if they say we have a committee of 5 instead of a committee of 3, that goes into effect immediately. If it says we're changing from 2 publications to 3 publications, there's a 3-year wait again, unless you want to go by the new one. Once you say you want to go by the new one, you can't go back and forth. You can't say old this year, new this year, old this year. Once you decide, you've got to stick with it. Okay, any questions so far?
I have a question.
Yep.
I understand through speaking through some of the other professors in my department that you pretty much can that just, like, as far as how someone wants it to be presented or whatnot? Is that internal within my department, or once it is approved out of my department, it goes on and?
What do you mean by jumps through hoops?
To constantly modify your PIF to make it presentable to someone's liking.
Once your PIF leaves the department, it's frozen.
Okay, so it's internal.
Yeah, the college can't come back and say, you know, you really should have put pink in instead of green. No, it goes to the college as it leaves the department. Now, there's a provision that if you want to add something to your PIF that became available after it left the department, so maybe you got a publication and you want to stick it in for this year instead of waiting until next year and putting it in, there's a mechanism for doing that. But you have to have certain approvals. But once it leaves the department, now at the department level, I think there should be some conversation between the personnel committee, the department chair, maybe other senior faculty in the department saying, look at my PIF. What do you think? You may not get universal agreement. I would also suggest finding someone in a different department in your college, for example, and say, how does this read to you as someone outside my department? You know, somebody who's been successful in the process. So can you jump through hoops? Yes, but hopefully it's jumping through hoops toward a better product, not just jumping through hoops for the sake of jumping.
I understand it's really for the sake of jumping, because someone might want 2-point, or like 10-point typeface, double space, someone else might want something else. But that's all internal.
It's your file.
But it's because I'm in the art department, I guess, right?
No. And it depends on who's in your department, let's be real. Okay, so teaching effectiveness, and again, some departments may require that you put in a syllabus or syllabi, sample syllabi. Be careful when you're putting things in your file. Sometimes you may want to put in, here's a term paper from my A+ student. And it's just, this is an example of the great work I'm doing. One of my students did this. Don't put it in. Why? No? Any guesses? You're violating the student's right to privacy by putting their name and grade in a file that somebody else is going to read. Now, can you redact it if you want to? I suppose you could. But be careful in your file you're not putting in something that's going to violate somebody else's privacy rights. All well-intentioned, of course, but... And again, read your department's procedures because they may tell you what's in there. In my department, for example, we labored for a year and a half to finally get personnel procedures for our department. When I got on PP&R, I said, you know, our department probably should have procedures. I shouldn't be chair of PP&R and have it be a Section 600 department. So we worked hard for about a year and a half to get our procedures, and there was a lot of back and forth in doing that. Our department requires a short narrative at the beginning of each section, in addition to any summary one you want at the front end, but that's not required. In our department, it is. In your department, it may not be. So read your department procedures for the specifics. Consult with your chair, often and early, personnel committee, which changes every year, so talk to the new people every time they come in.